It was a neat and not unattractive cottage of the bungalow type, built of wood and with a small detached garage, and surrounded by a dozen acres or so of land which had at one time apparently been a market garden. Now it lay uncared for and weed-grown in the August sun, and after a glance around the officers turned their attention to the bungalow. It was locked so securely that even Herbert Dean, who was according to the inspector one of the best picklocks out of prison, was unable to effect a peaceable entry. They broke a window finally, and one after the other they crawled inside. The place was untidy but comfortable. There was a living room of sorts, a bedroom, a kitchen and a dining room which had clearly been devoted to other purposes. The inspector glanced around him and sniffed. "Packed it here," he said. "Where's the cellar, Sullivan?" "Right under the house, I imagine," said Sullivan cheerfully. "They mostly are." Three of the men went down the cellar stairs finally, to find there what they had expected, a small still, or cooker as the inspector called it, a vast array of bottles and so on. But Herbert Dean did not go with them. He was making a slow and painstaking inspection of the living room and the bedroom, which in the end yielded him nothing except a half-dozen books, entirely of the crime variety, a box of labels of an excellent English whiskey, and a notebook containing the names of some of our best citizens. He did better in the kitchen, however. Holmes had evidently done everything in his little country place but eat there, and the stove revealed itself as a dumping place for everything from broken glass to old newspapers. When the others emerged from the cellar they found him on the dirty kitchen floor, with a bed sheet before him and on it a miscellaneous assortment of old razor blades, defective corks, cigar ends and what looked like a book until it was opened, and then revealed itself into the type of receptacle sold in a good many stores and generally used for cigarettes. "See, you're happy, Dean," the inspector said, rather grimly. Herbert grinned and held up the box. "Here's the thing I told you about, anyhow," he said. Made it himself purely as an experiment, but rather a neat job at that. It would be interesting to know just how long he watched those library trips of Emily Lancaster's before he began to suspect, wouldn't it? The men examined the box. It was an ordinary book of fair size, with the center of each page neatly cut out but leaving an inch or less of margin. These margins had then been carefully glued together, and the interior strongly reinforced with a lining of adhesive tape. The result, which I now have, is a substantial box which looks like a rather well-worn book. Simple, isn't it? Herbert said. She carried 2 or 3 books each time, but the duplicate of this one went back and forth pretty regularly. They'd be fastened together probably, with a strap or a piece of cord. Cord probably, for I imagine it broke once, on the path to Euclid Street. The inspector was less humorous about the box than he had been about the blotter. He took it and examined it carefully. "He made it?" he said. "How do you know this isn't the box Emily Lancaster used, herself?" "Because Miss Louisa Hall saw him making it. As a matter of fact, he made it last Saturday night." The inspector looked annoyed. "Look here, Dean," he said. "I'll admit you're a valuable man. Maybe I don't always see eye to eye with you on this case, but I'm glad to have you. Just the same, I'm damned if I'll have you holding out on me, and that's what you're doing." "You'd have jailed Holmes in a minute if you'd got anything on him, Inspector. And I needed him. If he knew how that gold and currency had got out of the house, he might know where it went. I was watching him pretty closely myself." "Oh yeah? And you lost him, didn't you?" "I did. I had a man of my own on him, but he lost him Wednesday morning, at the cemetery." "And because you lost him, he's going there himself." But Herbert shook his head. "I'm guilty on one count, Inspector," he said, "but not on the other." None of us can allow for accident, and I think Holmes's death was an accident. It wasn't in the original program, anyhow. Maybe there was a fight. Maybe he'd been put off the truck and ran in front of it to stop it. But he died because a car went over his chest, and it's pretty hard to run down and kill an active man just because you want to do it. Chapter 36. They were still arguing over that, I believe, the inspector truculent and rather flushed, when Sullivan quietly came in from an examination of the garage and reported that Holmes's uniform was in it, and a small light truck. "Haven't gone over it," he said, "but it looks like the one we're after." It was, they discovered. There was the nail in the tire, and the unmistakable evidence that it had been driven through a freshly tarred road. Careful examination of seat and body revealed nothing else, however, although some fresh scratches in the rear looked as though it had recently carried something heavy and unwieldy.